You were with Amazon. Why leave that job?
I didn't really had that kick I thought I would have. Here at the sanctuary, we don't really just show them animals. We create emotions.
How different is your pet sanctuary?
Pagdandi, if I talk about my particular sanctuary, it was never a profit-making machine. क्यों खुलकर नहीं जीते या दोबारा थोड़ी ना आओगे, आदमी हो पहाड़े नहीं जो दोहराए जाओगे.
Welcome to Unstereotype Living Stories Library. We have showcased so many unconventional journeys. People are just loving it. If you have not watched yet, do subscribe to our YouTube channel Unstereotype by Shiv. Can you imagine someone getting bored with corporate job, human beings, and getting attracted to wildlife, animals, birds, and nature, and creating a sanctuary? That's Nihar for you. So, Nihar, I've known you since childhood, your childhood. And also, I remember we celebrated your first job after your engineering. How did this journey start?
Well, I think it was not a hobby which turned into a profession. I think it was who I was since a child. I remember that while other children collected toys or toy stories and things like that, my childhood was always surrounded towards nature or animals. I enjoyed going to a pet store more than rather going to a toy store or things like that, and rescuing animals or spending time with animals or learning about those experiences to visit a zoo or whatsoever was something which excited me more. So it just so happened that maybe eventually growing up, that was one part which was somewhere always hidden as a passion, which just popped out much later. And I later realized that the happy version of me was being close to nature. So I think that's how this whole shift from a corporate job to wildlife started for me.
You were with Amazon in the operations. You could have just continued visiting zoos, visiting sanctuaries. But why leave that job totally?
To be very honest, it was one of the most difficult, decision for me to switch my career from a very well settled, financially secure, job to a field, which I had no idea about. I definitely was passionate toward this particular field, or I wanted to make it big in this particular field, but I didn't know where to start. My education background also, was I was a mechanical engineer, but somehow while I was working, I didn't really had that kick. What I thought I would have much later. Maybe initially I thought it was just a phase, but as I started growing my journey with Amazon, somewhere I felt that I was not really doing justice to the corporate job, because I enjoyed spending my weekends more at a zoo or a sanctuary, and I looked forward to that particular thing than my growth at the company. So somewhere I knew that down the line, if I talk it about 4 or 5 years from that period, I would not really be happy in this particular space. So that's where I thought maybe it was time to move on. So I used to clock in as many volunteer hours as I could. I used to work with my mentors, at the zoo director, the zoo curator. So these people taught me the minute details of how ex-situ conservation works, or how does a zoo function, or how does rescue happens. And then I used to work at the zoo hospital to understand when an animal comes in, what are the protocols they follow, or things which go on in India. I started my own organization called as ARPF, which worked for zoo policing at Hyderabad Zoo to start with. And that's where on Sundays and public holidays I had my friends and my colleagues, who were interested towards wildlife. We used to go in there, we used to work as zoo police, we used to work giving aid to the existing staff what we had there.
So, when you say policing, what exactly does that
Policing was, we used to just have our volunteers placed at strategic enclosures, where on a Sunday, zoo would see a crowd around 30-40,000 on a particular day. And if you talk about the staff, they hardly have a staff of 80 to 90 people. So if you talk about the ratio, the ratio goes somewhere around 1 is to 50 or 1 is to 100. So one person has to precise over 100 people to ensure that they don't vandalize the enclosure, and the enclosure length also is a very huge space what you talk about. So we used to go there, we used to place ourselves at the enclosures and stop people from vandalizing inside. We used to do education talk shows there. We used to, and that's how the journey grew, because initially we started with 18 volunteers, and slowly we grew to more than 2,000 plus volunteers pan India. A lot of people, they started admiring our work. And in a nutshell, every day of my job is more like a picnic. I come, and I know that there's going to be a new challenge, and I look forward to that challenge because it is very exciting. It gives me a teaching in the end of the day.
So, Nihar, probably you could have still continued this along with your job with Amazon. If I remember correctly, it was a night shift that was at Amazon, and well, you could have sacrificed a sleep bit here and there, could have gone on some weekdays, and of course weekends were at the zoo any which way. But why did you think that no, this is more important, and especially financial stability also comes into picture here?
See, I feel that I read this somewhere, and that lines, was something which kind of inspired me. That the biggest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. We always wait that, oh, there's a trash there, okay, someone will come and lift it, and then we just throw the trash, कि ठीक है कोई और उठा लेगा उसको. But that never happens. So, I don't know why, I always wanted to be that driving force to start that particular initiative, because when I searched on search engines that is there any organization which works for zoo policing or zoo education, I found none. There were organizations working in situ conservations like WWF and other big giants who were working for conservation, but in the forest or in the communities, but there was none working in the zoo back then. So then I had to start my own organization, because that was the problem I could see, and I wanted to get into to the solution level of it.
So your interest, your fascination, and the gap, that all combined,
Yes.
और आपको लगा कि I think you have to quit the job. ये itself is going to be a big job.
See, the reason why quitting came was also because wildlife is not a 9 to 5 job. You cannot expect that 9 o'clock you'll go, you'll open the lock, and 5 o'clock you're going to close the lock and go back to your family. Wildlife is challenging. It makes you tired. It makes you mentally stressed, because it's a 25-hour job. People say that you just have 24 hours in a day, then how do you call it a 25-hour job? That extra 1 hour, is the whatever little breathers you get, what you have to squeeze in to push it inside and give it all to wildlife, because animals demand time. They demand your attention. They demand special care, and they demand patience. If even one of these things is lacking, I think that is where the whole puzzle collapses.
Which was you thought was the most important aspect of it? Because you spoke couple of things, a couple of dimensions of the entire wildlife as such.
I think for me, the most important part is education. I even today would not call myself a conservationist. I would rather call that I'm a wildlife educator, because I enjoy educating people. Even this sanctuary where we're sitting right now is built on that very principle, that education is the key. Conservation is the destination, but if you want to reach to that particular destination, education is the path. Until unless you don't change a human mindset, you don't teach children empathy, you don't teach them compassion, a single person is not sufficient enough to save the entire world. You need to build an army of like-minded people. You need to inspire the younger generation and make a better world for them to live in. So I think education part is always the best and the most important one for me. And I kind of enjoyed doing that, because not only zoo policing was what was happening, even when we caught the vandalizers, or even if we caught people who were, being a nuisance, we kind of counseled them. We kind of spoke to them that why are you doing it? Don't you know that there's a law to it? They're like, we are sorry, we didn't know that. Many times we got that. Obviously, there were one or two cases, which were completely something we had to manage in a very harsh way. But otherwise, 90% of the people, agreed that they didn't know that, and they are sorry for what they did.
So if I were to go slightly deeper into the education part of it, because when you say education, again, it's a huge spectrum.
Right.
Are you targeting any specific age group? Are you trying to deliver certain aspects of when you talk about education? Right. Anything specific about the wildlife?
I think that's where my mom and my wife comes into picture. Both of them have been pre-primary teachers for quite a while now. And we kind of designed this particular courses at all levels. I obviously enjoy educating the younger ones, the pre-primary batch or the higher school. So till 8th class is where we feel that the impact what you're going to create in that young minds is going to last much longer. But if you talk about pre-primary children, or if you talk about class from first to eighth, I think this is the age group where a child brain can be molded into something where if you want to make a wildlife warrior out of them, you can always do that. And that's where I think we started this sanctuary, where it's an exotic animal sanctuary. So exotic animals and wild animals both have their own level of protection, and both have their own law in terms of what you can handle or what you can interact with and all that. Exotic animals come with a much relaxed laws where you can interact with the exotic animal. So here at the sanctuary, we don't really just show them animals. We create emotions. They get to touch an animal, they get to feel the texture of an animal, they get to learn them up close, they get to ask questions, they get to understand the whole ecological aspect, and why is this particular animal, which is part of a puzzle, important for the global biodiversity. So when you teach them all these things, when you take them on a guided tour, when you have an animal interaction happening, that is where the curiosity rises. And I always tell that a fear for animal does not come when you're born. It is something which comes with the stories or the upbringing what you go through. And we don't really measure the success on how many animals we are rescued or how many animals we're trying to save. My success meter is how many minds have inspired, or how many people go back being a better version of themselves, spending time in the nature. So I think that is where the education part comes into the picture.
Nihar, within one passion, you are a zoo curator at Indore Zoo,
Right.
and then you are a founder and creator of this sanctuary. How do you manage these two?
Whenever I used to come to Indore, my hometown, in say summer holidays and all that, so I used to also visit Indore Zoo. So that is when I met my third and the most important mentor, who's also my boss right now, Dr. Uttam Yadav. He's the director of Indore Zoo, and he's the most dearest mentor to me, because he was the one who taught me, the curatorship of a zoo, or how does a zoo actually function on field. So 2016, when I came to Indore, that's when I was offered this curatorship and education officer post at Indore Zoo, and I took the charge back then. And to start with, initially we used to just focus on basic problem levels, that how can we take Indore Zoo to new heights, because Indore Zoo being a small zoo under the zoo category, it was only 51 acres, and when I worked in Hyderabad Zoo, it was 375 acres. So it was a large zoo. So obviously you come with a vast experience of working with a lot of exotic species, a lot of exotic animals, a huge biodiversity of animals there. And at Indore, you wanted to make a better life for the animals what you have here. So that's how the journey started. Well, a lot of people were first getting the animals, but they didn't know how to take care of the animal. And obviously, when the animals were small and when they were, according to amateur hobbies, cute, when they started becoming big, or when they started taking in more space or were more maintenance, that is where it became a challenge for them to keep, and they wanted to give away the animals. Now, no zoo in the country is ready to take in a huge amount of exotic animals, and there was no center in India where which was focusing back then on exotic animal rescue, rehabilitation, or education. To be very honest, like even when we started, all the data or knowledge which we started with was any wildlife book we could get our hands on, or Google back then, or whatsoever was the only source of knowledge what we had. And there was not many exotic veterinarians who would work on these particular species. So if a snake falls sick, or if a tarantula falls sick, they might ultimately die. So that was the biggest challenge which I could see back then. And then that's how the whole foundation of Pagdandi was laid, where I had many animals, exotic species, as a child. So I wanted to make a place where I can keep all these animals in a very naturalistic environment. When we started keeping in animals, and when my friends or my families got to know about that particular thing, that is when the word spread, and a lot of people who wanted to give away the animals, they came and started approaching us. So that's how the sanctuary started slowly getting in the animals from outside.
तो निहार सुनने में आ रहा है कि जगह जगह पेट सैंक्चुरी स्टार्ट हो रही है इंडिया में एंड पीपल किड्स एंजॉइंग टेकिंग द पिक्चर्स विद देम विच आई टू डिड बट विथ योर वास्ट नॉलेज I mean, you have got more than a decade curating a zoo, which is much, much bigger than a pet sanctuary. Because almost all these sanctuaries would be around what? 1 or 2, or max to max 3 acres. And you have been curating zoos of 50, 60, 70 acres zoo. Now, with that vast knowledge, inclination for that education, you have yourself rescued so many animals. All of this, is it bringing any special dimension to your pet sanctuary? Is it creating a different impact altogether? How different is your pet sanctuary?
For me, Pagdandi, if I talk about my particular sanctuary, it was never a profit-making machine, and it never is, because I had a secure job at corporate. I quit my job. I worked on endless hours volunteering at a zoo. I gained my experience from that, and then I struggled to get a job, at the zoo. Then I worked hard to get my zoo to a level where the country now recognizes the zoo as one of the best zoo in the country. So all these things, came at the cost. I did everything because I was always passionate for this particular field. When I started Pagdandi, it was a complete barren land for almost 27, 30 years. And there was not a single blade of grass. I showed you the pictures of day one, when where you can see kilometers together, entirely, just rocky terrains and all that. And when I took this land, even my neighbors or the farmers around, they made fun of me, saying that, why did you even invest in a dead man's land, which is not going to give you any yield? But the only thing which kind of attracted me towards this particular land was the mountains we have behind. I knew if there's a mountain, then there is a chance of reviving the biodiversity. And we started at that level. We first started planting all local biodiversity plants, then starting with digging a well to powering the place with solar energy. So we went for all sustainable things, and we planted more than 5,000 varieties of rare and endemic plants, and slowly the biodiversity was attracted. It was not an easy journey, to be very honest. Now coming to the animal part of it, I always loved having animals as pets. So my pets had a bigger place at this particular space, which I had created. Obviously, with my vast knowledge at the zoo, designing enclosures, enrichment for animals. So we just don't keep animals. We ensure that they feel the most naturalistic environment what they have in the wild. Obviously, these animals cannot go back to their origin country, so at least we can replicate whatever things we can, and try to keep them mentally active by giving enrichment, various activities, various puzzles, and all that. So that is what my specialization was in. So that's how the whole idea where I wanted to start it for schools came in. And from schools started coming in a lot of requests where children who missed this trip on that particular day wanted to come on the weekend with the parents, because everyone in the class spoke about the place, that we went there, this is what we saw, this is the story, do you know that iguanas have three eyes, and things like that. So then it started opening for public, to be very honest. But it is still never a profit making machinery for us, because one of the most hardest part, if I would say, for any person who owns a pet, is the maintenance of an animal, and we have hundreds of them. So every animal is unique. We have reptiles, we have small marmosets, those are pocket monkeys. Then we have flightless birds. We have animals from the African continent. We have animals from rainforest continents. Those species. So the requirement for all these species differ. Some need desert setup, some need moist setup. And to ensure that all these things are done, you need staff, you need resources, you need a lot of things, to replicate the natural world. So for us, the animal welfare is the first top priority. And second thing, that's the reason we chose the toughest part of this whole pet sanctuary concept, which is education. So even today, when we take in visitors, we only take in limited visitors per slot, and it's a very strict guideline that there's no, walk-ins allowed at a center. A very dedicated website we have for this particular thing, where you can block your slot. We only take in 20 people, in a slot, and you get a 2 hours of thorough guided tour. So in that 2 hours, you are taken around, you are told about each and every animal, and even the interaction what you have with these exotic animals are all very ethically done. We show them in a very naturalistic environment. We have a woodlog where they are kept. A person can come behind it, they can touch and feel the specimen and take a picture with it, or hold a tarantula in the hand by sitting down. You should not be doing any kind of gimmick with that particular specimen. That is what we ensure that never happens at Pagdandi. So these are the things what we especially are very careful, because we don't want to teach children or any of a visitor that the animal experience what you're getting is recreational activity for you. We want them to go back with a learning.
Amal Paus of Nihar. She's co-founder of Pagdandi Eco Farms and an educator herself. Hi Amal, how do you enjoy teaching children about wildlife here?
So basically, I was a teacher by profession. I taught little kids from, you can say, pre primary age group. And the thing is that I was always interested in animals, even as a child growing up myself. So it kind of worked out for me because I get to teach what I was doing back in school, but on a topic of something that interests me, that is wildlife, that is animals and everything. So it kind of coincides with each other. Now I get to educate children about animals since I have a lot of information about them.
Amal, you have known Nihar as father of almost all the animals at the sanctuary. Some are born here, some have been brought, some have been rescued. Now with Agastya, do you see a different Nihar?
I would say yes. I mean, Nihar has always been a very compassionate person. Initially, he had this fire in him that he needs to get everything done on time. But now he has slowed him down in a good way. So now he's more patient, he's kinder, he's softer. And I love this side of Nihar because this is something that, I was hoping that would come along with a child. So it has definitely brought some positive changes in him.
I hope that brings back his love for human beings also. निहार, तुमको 12 साल पहले अमेज़ॉन में जो काम करता था निहार, वो अगर आज अभी मिलेगा तो उसके कंधे पे हाथ रखकर क्या कहोगे?
आई थिंक मैं एक ही चीज़ बोलूँगा कि वेल डन. आई थिंक if I could foresee what joy or happiness I would be getting, what I'm getting today, I think I would have quitted the job much earlier. And all those questions by relatives or friends, all those laughs which people had on my decision, or all those worries which me and my parents had, I would just tell the younger self, if I get a chance to go back, that you did well, and you generally lived what you that time was seeking to go for. So I don't regret any of my decisions, what I made in life, and I feel that anyone, even your viewers who are watching this episode, if you generally have a passion and if you are ready to, quit everything to live your passion, then go for it. Do not doubt yourself, because again the same lines that क्यों खुलकर नहीं जीते या दोबारा थोड़ी ना आओगे, आदमी हो पहाड़े नहीं जो दोहराए जाओगे.
वेल सेड निहार.
थैंक यू सो मच.
अगर आपको आपके वाइल्ड लाइफ एक्सपीरियंस के बारे में किसी को कुछ अपील करना है तो व्हाट वुड दैट बी?
My only appeal would be, there's no rocket science in which I'm going to request. Be a compassionate person, have empathy for nature, have empathy for every living, thing what we have out there. Because, we share the planet, we do not own the planet. Please be more compassionate towards animal, have empathy for all the living creatures we have. Respect every, biodiversity elements what we have. And especially if you talk about animals, please don't treat them as commodities. Do not just buy a pet for the sake of it or as a status symbol, because animals demand a lot of care, a lot of time, and a lot of money. So if you are ready to give all three of that, only then get a pet. Otherwise, just getting a pet for status symbol and abandoning it is not something which is right for the nature or for we as a human being. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nihar, for taking us to the world of wildlife. That is so unstereotypical journey of yours.
Thank you so much for having us on your channel. It was a pleasure hosting you guys, and I'm sure that with this episode out, a lot of young minds who have a passion for nature or wildlife, can somewhere think about starting their own sanctuary or working towards nature. So thank you once again.
Sure, Nihar. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss real and unstereotypical stories.